The Congress of South African Trade Unions is behind the state capture inquiry because evidence coming out of the commission will help the federation in its fight to defend workers who have been affected by corruption in government-owned entities. Now, the Trade Union Federation has called for speedy prosecutions of those accused of wrongdoing in government. Workers are seen by many as the faceless victims who have been severely affected by corruption. For more on this, I'm joined now by parliamentary coordinator at Cosatu, that's Matthew Parks, and he talks to us all the way from Limpopo province. Mr. Parks, thank you very much for making time to speak to us. Your assessment of the year that was, in as far as the information and testimonies coming out of the State Capture Commission of Inquiry.
Yes, no, look, I think we must appreciate every bit of light that has shone on the pandemic of corruption. This cancer of corruption has really had a devastating impact upon workers. It has seen thousands of workers lose their jobs at various state-owned enterprises like SAA, SA Express, and many other entities. It has seen public servants not getting the wage increase this year, and in fact may not even get the increases for the next few years if we listen to what government is saying. But also it's having a huge impact upon workers and society at large. When Eskom was experiencing the peak of load shedding, that threatened hundreds of thousands of workers' jobs in the mining and manufacturing and in fact all economic sectors. So really it is a huge burden to workers. I think we appreciate some of the light being shone at the Commission of Inquiry, but that's not enough. What we need to see is people being arrested, being taken to court, being prosecuted, and finally being convicted. It is positive to see some arrests recently, but we've been on this road before where we've seen a flood of arrests and media publicity, and we've been disappointed by seeing very few people going to prison and very few assets being attached. But having said that, I think there were some green shoots that we saw recently at Eskom, where they've been through the civil claims process, been able to start recovering some of the billions which were stolen. But that's only the tip of the iceberg, to be honest.
Talking about workers and how they have been affected by this issue that is now known countrywide, which is that of state capture, although some argue that this whole notion of state capture is non-existent. I can only remember the SAPC situation, Matthew Parks, and how the workers there are being threatened with retrenchments when you have had very destructive figures such as Xoli Mngambi, who has been to the State Capture Commission of Inquiry, clowning about, basically. Why are people like that not in prison?
That's the question we need to all be asking. And for us, it's a huge point of frustration. We know who the culprits are, whether it's the former leadership of government at a cabinet level, whether it's people who are in the SOEs, like you just mentioned, Xoli, or others in Eskom, and they're allowed to humiliate us, in effect, by pontificating on Twitter, ranting and raving. And it doesn't take a rocket scientist to realize, to go through these people's bank accounts, to do a lifestyle audit, that their salaries could not afford the lifestyle they had. There's been countless media exposures. So to be honest, the National Prosecuting Authority, the Hawks, the police, the judiciary, they really have to come to the party. We appreciate the president is not operating a dictatorship where he can simply instruct the police or the NPA what to do, but the leadership of these law enforcement agencies and the judiciary really have to come to the party. This is not a normal situation. We had really hoped, and there's been some positive commitments, that government will really prioritize and put extra funding for priority commercial crimes courts. There's been a bit of effort and movement in that regard. They need to do much more. We can't afford the normal 2 or 3 or 4 year court process when you're dealing with this pandemic of corruption. It has to be dealt with quickly. Otherwise, it's going to actually undermine government's efforts to clean up corruption. You remember about 2 years ago, the mayor of Durban was arrested, but she's not been brought to court yet. And that's really going to undermine government's efforts to uproot corruption if they don't really move with much more determination and speed.
And I'm glad you raised the issue of the eThekwini Mayor, Zandile Gumede, because the ANC in KwaZulu-Natal has actually gone as far as to suggest that perhaps this whole notion of that commission, or rather the prosecuting authority, possibly being involved in what I would describe as, the political tit for tat and using state institutions in order to further these ends. They actually warning that this might actually ring true given the kind of actions that have come about as a result of the failure by the NPA. They made it clear that Zandile Gumede was arrested back in December last year. It's December 2020, and no charges have been preferred on Zandile Gumede and her co-accused. So how in the world do we even rely on the NPA? Where's Shamila Patoy?
No, exactly. And she was appointed 2 years ago. I mean, she appears to be very competent, etc. But this cannot go on forever and ever. They have to get the ducks in a row. So when you're charging, for example, the Secretary General of the ANC, we will really hope the NPA and the police have the ducks in a row, that they've done their homework. Otherwise, it's going to create a huge political firestorm. It's going to end up undermining government's efforts to clean up corruption. So they really need to jack up the act. They can't afford to go about this in a very blasé way. And you know, Xoli, when you go to court, you can find the court processes will be postponed a dozen times. We can't afford that kind of a bureaucratic lethargy when it comes to these kind of high priority cases. They really have to operate it in a very tight military-like operation where everything is done 100%. You can't afford for a simple slip up in any regard, because it's going to create a huge backfire.
Yeah.
The nation went through about 10 years of Jacob Zuma's endless postponements. It didn't do anything to boost confidence in the judiciary. So government really has to do its homework properly.
You talk about the former president, Jacob Zuma, and there has been the call from the very party that he led not so long ago. They urged members, particularly those implicated for allegations of their involvement, alleged involvement in state capture. The call was simple: please cooperate with the commission. I asked this question to the alliance partner that is yours as well, the SACP, out of their central committee meeting that took place at the weekend, and they repeating the same thing, that he has got to cooperate with the commission, but he doesn't look like it's going to happen. What needs to happen here to try and get the former president to cooperate with this commission?
Look, my understanding of a commission of inquiry, that they are creatures of the judiciary. They have the same powers of a judiciary to an extent that they can summons you, and if you defy the summons, you can be held in contempt. I think they have the right to call the police to assist them in enforcing that summons. So if the former president doesn't want to cooperate, they shouldn't be shy. They should go and have him collected from wherever he is and brought to the commission of inquiry. If you allow one person to refuse to testify, it's going to have a devastating, cascading effect. Then every other culprit or suspect will just simply refuse to come. And then what is going to be the point of it? It'll have the same impact of going to church for a confession. They need to really be very firm and set an example of the former president. It's unfortunate the former president is choosing to undermine the very commission that he set up. But so be it. Government, the judiciary, the commission must be very firm with him at all times.
But politically speaking, though, Matthew Parks, isn't that exactly what the former president is looking for? That he gets arrested, and in the words of Kebi Mapatwe and his MKMVA, should the former president be arrested, we might see instability in this country. Isn't that possibly perhaps what the former president wants to test, whether there can be instability as a result of him being hauled to a jail cell?
No, sure. Look, you don't necessarily have to take him to a jail cell. You can simply collect him and drive him to the commission of inquiry. Once he's done testifying, you can release him. You're right. It would mean the police will have to be on standby and have to deal with crowd control, etc., etc. It really shows you the lack of leadership by the former president, that he can put all of us in that kind of a situation. We can't also afford to allow him to simply walk away and give the middle finger, so to speak, to the commission of inquiry. Because that'll collapse the commission.
Look, while we may... sorry, Matthew Parks. Because of time, while we may still, focus the attention, and some have said unfairly so, on the former president, but the fact of the matter is that he is one of the central figures. In excess of about more than 30 witnesses have implicated him in that commission. There are, though, other ANC members who have been implemented. If you look at the recent testimony around the company EOH, I can talk many names. Zizi Kodwa springs to mind. The mayor of Johannesburg, Jeffrey Makubu, springs to mind. Why isn't there as much focus on those figures as well? Because it would appear, and I use these words very carefully, it would appear that the ANC, possibly in its entirety, is tainted here.
No, look, the cancer of corruption goes very deep in the ANC, from national to provincial to local. It's very deep from national government to provincial government to municipalities to SOEs. It's also rampant in the private sector. But you're right. I mean, the former president is seen to be at the epicenter, the most important actor in this era of state capture. That's why there's a lot of focus on him. But I think you're also right that we mustn't believe that simply because there's been a change of administration, that somehow there's been a complete Damascene event where everybody who is being involved in corruption has somehow walked away. It's going to take some time. It's also important, I think, as you're kind of alluding to, that when the NPA, etc., are dealing with corruption, they shouldn't be seen to be soft on one grouping and hard on another grouping. They must be hard on all factions of the ANC. It's only when you start building that kind of integrity that people will begin to have confidence in the state. And look, doesn't matter what faction or what party or what church you belong to. If you're corrupt, you must pay the price. There must be consequences for it. Otherwise, we're not going to rebuild this country and the government.
Matthew Parks, thank you very much for your time. He is Cosatu's parliamentary coordinator, talking to us from Limpopo.